Hello, welcome to the Sound of Science, the place where we deconstruct unscientific bogus and silly scams. Let's go get them. Hello, my fellow critical thinkers. Thanks for tuning in. It was about time to present you another long-format video debunking some nonsense. The problem always is that there is far too much hogwash out there to choose from. But this morning I stumbled upon a video displaying the Northern Irish mathematician John Lennox talking about his belief in his God. And when Lennox talks about his God, I want to listen. Not because he supposedly says smart things, but because in general, Christian apologists see John Lennox as their champion. Within the circle of apologists, John Lennox is regarded as the pinnacle of Christian thinking. This is the absolute best they've got. Now, I've made many videos about dollar store apologists who are even frowned upon by their own cult. And I've taken on some Christian charlatans who mainly try to separate gullible believers from their money. And although it's important to keep on doing that, I find it most satisfying to debunk the droppings out of people like John Lennox, because that usually leads to the inevitable conclusion that the arguments of the supposedly greatest Christian thinkers are the exact same nonsense that is spouted by their butchered minions who parrot their hogwash mostly without even understanding how stupid their arguments really are. So, if we demonstrate that the arguments of John Lennox are meaningless, then we kind of automatically cover the arguments of most other Christian apologists, which saves a lot of time. So, today I happily review an interview with John Lennox that I stumbled upon on a YouTube channel called Daily Dose of Wisdom. You might know them. They are closing in on 400,000 subscribers on YouTube. Their videos are pretty popular and are pretty influential within the realm of Christian thinking on YouTube and beyond. Daily Dose of Wisdom. The name alone already annoys me. Wisdom is such a pretentious word. It suggests that they've got some mysterious magic ingredient that overrules data, facts, reality, evidence and science. You know, the kind of stuff that actually matters for determining what is true and what is not true. Christian apologists don't have that kind of stuff. They've got wisdom. And of course, wisdom is a word that has no meaning. Wisdom cannot be detected, it cannot be measured, it cannot be distinguished from something that doesn't exist, just like the Christian God. No wonder wisdom is often claimed by Christian apologists who simply lack evidence to support their arguments. So when people say they will present you wisdom, I'm on alert from the get-go. And then we haven't even looked at the title of their video, which is Oxford Mathematician Exposes Why Atheists Can't See Evidence for God. Well, I've got news for you. Lennox is not an Oxford mathematician. He was an Oxford mathematician. He's retired. Lennox is an ex-Oxford mathematician. Lennox is an emeritus professor at Oxford, which only means he is no longer a professor at Oxford. So John Lennox is an Oxford mathematician in the same way Bill Clinton is a president of the United States. Not anymore. Another important word in the title of their video is exposes. They even typed it in capital letters, but for something to be exposed, it first must be true. Otherwise, there is nothing to expose. So if you promise to expose something, you'd better bring some solid and verifiable evidence to support your claims. And I can already tell you that that is not what Lennox will present you. And on a final note, before I start reviewing the actual video, The title of their video suggests that John Lennox will present some dramatic reveal that will expose the actual reason why atheists can't see evidence for the existence of a God. Now, that is a rather assumptuous choice of words that suggests that there actually is evidence for the existence of a God in the first place, but atheists just fail to see it, while reality shows us that nobody can see that supposed evidence for the existence of a God, because that evidence isn't there. So there is nothing wrong with the eyesight of atheists. The real issue here is Christians believing in stuff, despite a lack of evidence for what they believe. I thought it to be important to show you how Christian apologists load their choice of words with all kinds of unproven assumptions and pretensions, probably in an attempt to get at least some kind of head start before the actual discussion even begins, because they know that when the real debate begins, their lack of evidence and arguments is most likely to damage their position. Having said all of this, let's listen to and comment on the interview with John Lennox as published on Daily Dose of Wisdom.
Imagine that we think the God of the Bible is a God of the gaps. He's just put there to explain until we get a scientific explanation.
Wait, we have to interrupt John Lennox right away from the very start. You see, John Lennox, much like fellow Christian apologist William Lane Craig, is a master in misrepresentation, and I think John Lennox is a bit better at it because his misrepresentations are more subtle than the ones used by William Lane Craig. Imagine that we think that the God of the Bible is a God of the gaps. Right from the start, it looks as if John Lennox is misrepresenting the God of the gaps principle. I'm not sure yet in what direction he will take us, but we don't have to imagine anything about the God of the gaps principle. Lennox is acting as if he is giving us the courtesy of imagining that the God of the gaps principle is holding any value, as if the principle itself is some kind of belief that for the sake of the argument he will now pretend to go along with for the moment. But the God of the gaps principle is just a position that is demonstrably taken by many Christian apologists. We don't have to imagine that that concept exists. John Lennox himself uses the God of the gaps principle all the time. God of the gaps only means that there are gaps in scientific knowledge, so there is stuff we don't know for sure. Maybe we will find out later, maybe we won't. And then a Christian apologist rushes in and smuggles in some extra steps and says, there are things that science can't explain, so there must be something outside of science, and that is God. So that's just a logical fallacy known as the argument from ignorance. We don't know, therefore God. That is what God of the gaps means. So, saying, imagine that we think that the God of the Bible is a God of the gaps is a totally nonsensical misrepresentation of what God of the gaps means. God of the gaps is not some kind of model of what a God supposedly is. It doesn't describe a specific type of God who then is a God of the gaps. The only acknowledgeable and tangible element in the God of the gaps principle is the gaps, not the gods. So again, I don't know where Lennox wants to take us, but it surely sounds like a setup for a misrepresentation of all kinds of stuff. Probably he will try to present the God of the gaps model as some sort of atheist belief, while in reality it is a theistic fallacy that he himself repeatedly commits. Let's continue.
Then it dawned on me, if you believe that God's like that, you have to choose between God and science. Yeah. Why? Because that's the way you've defined God. You've defined God to be a non-explanation waiting for science to come along. So of course you have to choose.
Well, this totally confirms what I already predicted. John Lennox says, if you believe that God is like that, so he's now acting as if the God of the gaps principle is some kind of atheist model of what a God could be. It's not. Instead, the God of the gaps principle is a theistic fallacy. Lennox now even pretends that the God of the Gaps principle entails some kind of definition of what a God is. It doesn't. He totally misrepresents the concept, and I think he knows it very well. You don't become an Oxford professor for not understanding basic philosophical concepts. I think he just chooses to turn the God of the Gaps principle into something it is not. You see, John Lennox is now setting up a straw man argument. Next step is that he will attack this supposed view of what a God could be, which is a view nobody ever presented. He will then deconstruct this view that nobody ever presented, and then he will cry victory for vanquishing an argument that nobody ever made. The exact same trickery is used by William Lane Craig when he addresses the problem of evil, which he misrepresents as an atheist claim, which it is not. The problem of evil is a theistic contradiction. I've made another video about that, but back to John Lennox. Let's pick up where his delusion brought us. Lennox now claims that we have to choose between God and science, which is nonsense. There's a lot that science doesn't know, but there is also a lot that science does know. And scientific discoveries are made by both non-religious people and religious people. If a religious scientist discovers a new type of frog in the Amazon rainforest, that doesn't force him to stop believing in his God. There are many other good reasons for not believing in the existence of a God, mainly being the total lack of verifiable and testable evidence for the existence of a God. But discovering a new type of frog, discovering a new type of metal that can be used in car batteries, or discovering a new type of building material that makes building much cheaper, all of those are scientific discoveries, and none of them forces you to give up your belief in your God. So, stating that people have to choose between science and believing in the God is nonsense. And if it were to be a true consequence of the God of the Gaps principle, then it's a problem of people like yourself, Mr. Lennox, who repeatedly apply the God of the Gaps principle. So, this whole plea of Lennox is total nonsense, even though he's only 3 sentences into his narrative. It's the exact same pattern as I've witnessed in my previous video about Lennox. This man spouts so much nonsense that it takes 10 minutes to correct him on just a few sentences. But let's continue anyway. Oh, and extra double bonus. Just watch how the guy who interviews Lennox is totally void of any critical thinking. He just keeps nodding, yes, yes, while Lennox only produces total nonsense. What is wrong with these people? They wear suits, they've got degrees, they speak at conventions, and all the time they have no clue how to distinguish meaningful discourse from utter rubbish. Okay, so back to Lennox.
The God of the Bible is not a God of the gaps.
Almost right, Mr. Lennox. You just said a few words too many. Let me correct that.
The God of the Bible is not.
Exactly. The God of the Bible is not. Just stick to that, and as soon as you can present any verifiable and testable evidence that demonstrates the existence of your God, then we can examine what he is. But till that time, there is no reason to believe that he exists in the first place. So, what else do you've got?
And I often say to people, have you ever read the first line of the Bible? It goes like this.
Why would you refer people to the Bible? The Bible is a book full of claims that we want you to prove using verifiable and testable evidence. Reading the Bible will only reveal more unsupported claims that need evidence to be taken seriously. Why don't you Christians just stick to the basics? You claim this God character exists. Now please, prove this God of yours is real. Anything else is irrelevant in any religious debate, as long as the evidence for the existence of a God does not exist. All the other statements that come from churches and their representatives are pretty useless.
Have you ever read the first line of the Bible? It goes like this. In the beginning, God created the bits of the universe we don't yet understand. And they all laugh, as you do, politely. Thank you very much. That's nonsense.
So, you do exactly as I predicted. You're now finalizing your straw man argument. Nobody ever said or even suggested that that is what the Bible says. So you're now labeling a statement that nobody ever made as nonsense. while pretending that that is some kind of atheist position, perhaps? It's unclear because you never clearly explained whose position this is supposed to be anyway. If you were to be honest, you would first tell those people what the Bible truly says about science, which is nothing. The Bible totally fails in the science department. The Bible could have been a perfect opportunity for your God to release some proper useful scientific knowledge. Why didn't your God use his Bible to explain germ theory instead of telling how to bring gay people to death? Why didn't your God use the Bible to explain vaccinations to us instead of telling how to beat up slaves? Is your God just silly? Does he like us to die because of lack of medical knowledge? Or does your God simply not exist? I guess that would have been some honest critical remarks about your Bible, but you prefer to build your straw man argument and get a good laugh out of a misrepresentation of the God of the Gaps principle and some kind of imaginary position that nobody ever took. Oh well, I've only responded to a couple of your sentences, and because you just keep on producing nonsense and misrepresentations, my reaction already takes 15 minutes. It is such a pity that it is simply impossible to respond to everything you say, and that is your mistake, and yours only. Why aren't you Christian apologists capable of just producing at least 1 minute of speech without rubbish assumptions and nonsense claims? Okay, let me listen to 1 or 2 more of your sentences, and I'm afraid that'll be the end of it for today. What else you've got? Please do better and come up with some actual arguments or evidence for the existence of your God that would present some kind of intellectual challenge. Go ahead, make my day.
Moreover, think about ordinary life. The more I understand about art, the more I admire the genius of a Rembrandt, not the less.
Again, I've no idea what you're up to now, but again, it's total nonsense. The more you understand something, the more you admire it. It's not a common principle that applies in general. The more I understand about childhood cancer, the more I hate it. I don't admire childhood cancer at all. Do you? Luckily, diseases like that just develop in a natural way. Because if there would be some kind of almighty creator who invented diseases like that, we would be facing a total immoral thug, wouldn't we? What else do you've got?
The more I understand of engineering, the more I admire the genius of a Henry Ford, not the less.
Again, I've no idea what point you're trying to make here, but again, it doesn't make any sense. The more you understand of modern torture techniques, the more you admire the creative minds that come up with possibilities to put people through unimaginable pain. What do you want?
And going up to the universe, the more I understand of the universe, the more I admire. This is Newton, the God who did it that way.
So, what is your point? You admire the universe. How does that make sense? You admire the universe as in Henry Ford was such a great person. I admire him so much. And now you think the universe is such a great character, and therefore you admire the universe? And that is what Newton said? Or is it that because we know that Rembrandt created paintings, and because we know that Henry Ford created cars, because there's mountains of verifiable and testable evidence that proves all of that, and because we know that, you're now trying to fumble in the unproven and unsupported assumption that there is some kind of God who created the universe? Don't tell me that that is what you're trying here. That is so typically a butchered apologist argument. People like Ray Comfort use that. That fool thinks that because T-shirts are created, that proves that there is a God who created the universe. Are you trying to pull the same nonsense here with paintings in cars? Oh, come on now. Don't disappoint me. By now it's painfully clear how poor and silly your arguments are. You promised us to expose the reason why atheists can't see the evidence for the existence of this God character. And you did expose that, but in a totally different way than you hoped for. You perfectly demonstrated that Christian apologists like yourself never, ever present any verifiable and testable evidence that proves that their God exists. And that is the exact reason why atheists can't see evidence for your God, because it's not there. High-profile Christian apologists like yourself have got their entire lives to present that evidence, year after year, decade after decade, century after century. Atheists have been asking and waiting for that evidence, but Christian apologists have never produced any such thing. And that, of course, leads to the question if evidence for the existence of a God will ever be produced and will ever exist. And that fundamental lack of evidence for the existence of a God leads to the only reasonable conclusion about religious beliefs. There is no good reason whatsoever to believe that a God exists. Is there any Christian out there who does think that he or she found the golden egg of divine evidence? Please present it, preferably in a video, so that I and many others can have a look at it. Thanks in advance, and thanks for watching. But while you're here, please like my video and subscribe to my channel, because that will help me to make more videos in which I debunk nonsense and spread the sound of science. Thanks.